After 3 months, we put out to sea in a ship that had wintered in the island. It was an Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods of Castor and Pollux. We put out at Syracuse and stayed there 3 days. There, we set sail and arrived at Rhegium. The next day, the south wind came, and on the following day, we reached Petulia. There, we found other brothers who invited us to spend a week with them. And so we came to Rome. The brothers there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. At the sight of these men, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with a soldier to guard. 3 days later, he called together the leaders of the Jews. And when they had assembled, Paul said to them, "My brothers, although I have done nothing against our people or against the customs of our ancestors, I was arrested in Jerusalem, handed over to the Romans. They examined me, wanted to release me because I was not guilty of any crime deserving death. But when the Jews objected, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar. Not that I had any charge to bring against my people. For this, I have asked to see you and talk with you, and it is because of the hope of Israel that I am bound with this chain." They replied, "We have not received any letters from Judea concerning you. None of the brothers who have come from there have reported or said anything bad about you. But we want to hear what your views are. For we know that the people everywhere are talking about this sect." They arranged to meet Paul on a certain day and came in even larger numbers to the place where he was staying. From morning till evening, he explained and declared to them the kingdom of God and tried to convince them about Jesus from the law of Moses and from the prophets. Some were convinced by what he said, but others would not believe. They disagreed among themselves and began to leave, and the Holy Spirit spoke the truth to your forefathers when he said through Isaiah the prophet, "Go to this people and say, you will be ever hearing but never understanding. You will be ever seeing but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I will heal them. Therefore, I want you to know that God's salvation has been sent to you, to the Gentiles." And they believed. For 2 years, for 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house and welcomed all who came to see him. Boldly, without hindrance, he preached the kingdom of God, taught about the Lord Jesus Christ. This is God's word. Grass withers with flower faith. God is perfect. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for the hope that you give us in the cross. And I pray, Lord, that you might take these words, take Luke's words that you've given him and have set down throughout the ages, that they might change our thinking, affect the way that we think and feel, and the way that we act, and the decisions that we make, and how we see the world, and how we see you, and even how we perceive ourselves. So change all that, captivate us by it, so it might lead us to change, to hopefulness, to encouragement, to repentance. You stay with prayer. I can remember, certain television series that I've been rather captivated by. There's one in particular that was on not too long ago called Heroes, about people with special abilities that they discovered and they were using, discovering but using for good, and then the evil characters. It's a play on the superhero theme, and it's on a television series idea. And I remember coming to the end of that series, and it only lasted for 2, 3, 4 years. And in the final, they were building everything up. I'm not going to tell you the end of it. Okay. Some of you might be watching with Netflix today. I got to be careful about some of the things. Sometimes if the series lasts too long and you haven't seen it, I'm just going to spoil it because get with it. Okay. But it is. You get to the end of the series, and I remember saying to the end of we get to the end of the series, and then building up for 3 years. This sort of, what's going to happen to Peter, and what's going to happen to the evil character, and how are their abilities going to be altered, and how it's going to change the world. What's going to go with the cheerleader? What is she going to do? And all some of you don't know what I'm talking about. That's okay. But it's all different parts of stories in there. And then you get to the end of the series, and they go, They didn't tell me about Peter. They didn't tell me about the cheerleader. What happened with that evil character? Same thing happened in Lost. Some of you got caught up in Lost, didn't you? Yeah. I saw that coming from season 1. I didn't get involved in Lost because I knew there was too much going on there. And in the end, they never answered it. You know? Sopranos was another sort of HBO series that got critically slammed because they ended, you know, you got an episode about the mob in New Jersey. And in the end, you see the final episode is that they're sitting at a table in a restaurant, and then the one main character, he sort of gets up and looks, and then it goes black. It just ends. Why do you end all these sort of anticlimactic endings to these epical stories that people are drawn into? And I go, here's a story in 2 parts. Here's a book written in part 1, part 2, the sequel to part 1, Acts, part 2. We get to the end of it, and Paul, or Luke has spent from chapter 19 till the end here talking about all of Paul's issues. I gotta get to Rome. Okay, we're gonna get to Rome, and then everything goes bad. He's arrested several times, goes before all the political leaders, all the government leaders. We're following it in utter detail. Amazing detail. And then finally he gets sent to Rome, but he's shipwrecked. And then he's shipwrecked on this island, and different various things happen. And we tell us what happened in terms of an island called Malta that he landed on, in the early part of this book. And we finally get to the end of it, and the end of it is, and so Paul for 2 years stayed at home and was welcomed by others and preached the gospel. Did he get to go to Rome? Did he get to talk to Nero? Did he end up dead? Did he end up? Did he talk? Did he convince anybody? Did he build a church in Rome? There's a lot of loose ends here, isn't there? Isn't it a little sort of unsatisfying to get to the end of this and you go, we spent all those many weeks on this thing and that's the ending? Maybe. But my question begs the answer that you're probably thinking of. It's not supposed to feel that way. Maybe it feels that way. You get to the end, Paul spends all this time on this topic and goes and Luke and spends all this time describing the life of Paul and describing all of the problems that he faced in getting to Rome, and then he finally gets to Rome, and then all we have is a couple of little paragraphs at the end of the whole experience we've been leading up to for 10, 12 chapters now. If Paul was the point of the story, then you should feel it. But I've been telling you week after week, what is the point of the story? All the weeks we've been talking about the book of Luke, what have we said? What's been the sort of intro to the intro, the prologue to the first part of the first point? Every single week is that Luke wrote the story about Jesus in 2 books. Jesus' earthly ministry, about what he began to do. Jesus' spiritual ministry, heavenly ministry, in the book of Acts, about what he continued to do and continues to do. And because he's the center of the story, because Jesus is the point of the story, the ending makes perfect sense. The ending is not anticlimactic. The ending is, well, the only sort of ending. The ending to this story isn't so much anticlimactic as it is expectant. The sense of, you get to the end of this story and all those ends have been tied up. Paul gets to Rome and the gospel is preached boldly and without hindrance. Jesus, the message of the cross, the message of grace is at the high point, is at the epicenter, it is at the New York City of the world at that point. Rome. And how does the gospel fare once it gets to Rome? What's the result of the gospel? What is the ministry of Jesus at the place when they finally get to the epicenter of the world, Rome? What is its condition? How is it faring? Well, faring pretty well. Boldly and without hindrance is happening at that moment. And that sort of ending ties up the loose end while also saying, I want a sequel to that. Where's Luke's 3rd book? I want to hear what happened next. And we see some of that in the pages further on, in the letters that Paul wrote to the churches that he planted, and we see some of the ripple aspect from that. But there's 2 things that we can mention, 2 points that I want you to see from this particular ending that helps us understand what the church was here and what it can be in our lives. Number one, first point, the point isn't about us. The point isn't about us. Number two, life's a struggle. Two simple points that I want to draw out. The point isn't about us. The point that what Paul is trying, what I keep saying Paul, he's the one described here. But Luke, the point that Luke is trying to get across is he's trying to get Paul, trying to help us see how Paul, Peter at the very beginning, because we lose Peter after like chapter 12. We don't hear about what happened with Peter for a long time. He was the center of the story in the early part of Acts. And then it moved over to Paul very quickly, and then he took over the rest of the book. And now even Paul is being shifted off to the center, and it's all and Luke is getting us back to what is the point of life? What is the point of the story? The point of the story is the gospel. It is the work and person of Jesus. Some of you know that I do community theater, and there's so much I learned by doing community theater. So much I didn't think I needed to learn. There's a lot of stuff that I learned about me and about life through doing community theater. And part of one of the things that you learn when you're in theater is it's a practical way to understand this very point. If I'm playing, or someone's playing in a show, playing the butler, and then we finish the show, and I talk with this person, which I have, various butlers in the stories, or the various sort of, move this furniture over here, or the person from, that comes over and has one line to share with a particular character. They come off, and at the end of the show, everybody comes out and they do their vows, right? And this person comes out and they do their vows, and then they come backstage and they say to me, well, it didn't seem like the audience applauded when I went out. And I want to say to this person, and I have said to this person, first, first thing I say is, I'm really sorry about that. That must feel really bad. And they go, yeah, it's not what I expected. And I go, second point, quickly. The play's not about you. The play's not about the butler. The play's about the hero. It's about the heroine. The play's about the story that's being told. And yes, they don't applaud. You don't get the applause. You don't understand your role in its context because it's not about you. There's a sense where Luke's telling us, and Jesus wants to tell us, when you live your life, the story is not chiefly about you. But he doesn't just say it like that. He says first, says it like a dad would say it to a child. He says it like a father tells his son who realizes for the first time life's not about him. And the father says, I understand the pain. I know that you want to be centered. I know that it hurts when you are not in the center. My world would be great if it was revolved around me. It really would. I've told my family this for years. Things would go better, even just life in the kitchen would be better if people could navigate around what I'm trying to accomplish in the kitchen. I'm trying to empty the dishwasher, my wife's trying to make a dip. And she doesn't need or want the same things I want, and we're constantly kind of running into each other. If we could just get the world to revolve around one of us, chiefly me, we would get it. We're done. And part of what humanity needs to be told, part of what humanity needs to realize is that the reason that our lives are not fluid, life-giving, nurtured, enjoyable, peaceful is because we're the butler thinking that all the applause should come to us when the show is about Jesus. And there's freedom in that. There's freedom in the sense of realizing that the play isn't about me. The play is about Christ, and that's what Luke is describing to us here. This is what the ending teaches us, is that when we view life through the lens that it is about Christ, it frees me from the burden, the obligation, the pressure, the sense of identity that Now I don't care how many people applaud me, because it's not really about me. It's me being able to say to the people, the play is about Jesus. It's also empowering. It's also empowering when it's freeing and empowering to know that the story, that life is not about me, because now I can get a ton of things done. Things can be accomplished now, because the chief thing that gets in the way of something getting accomplished is how much glory I get out of it. I tell people this across the board, from our ministry team, to my family, to the people at the shelter, to the people on the boards that I sit on in our community. One of the chief things that I try to say is, if it doesn't matter who gets the credit, we can get a lot of things done in our town. If it doesn't matter who gets credit, we get a lot of things done in your household, in our world, in this church. If it doesn't matter who gets the credit. And the reason that I need to get credit is because the reason you want to get credit, the reason you want, and that's glory, that's having glory, that's the applause. That's me struggling with needing to be the center of the story. Jesus gets the credit. When Jesus is the center of the story, when Jesus is the central figure to the play, the process of my life, to the process of humanity and the world, a lot of stuff can happen. It frees me from the burden. It empowers me to accomplish a ton of things, because now no longer do I need to be the one that gets credit. If our political system could understand this, just as one example, I don't talk a ton about that, but you can see it played out in the larger systems of life. It doesn't matter whether Republicans, Democrats, or Independents get the credit. We could get things to move faster forward, but that's part of the brokenness. We're broken. It's not natural for human beings to not want to be at the center. What's natural, and whenever I use the word natural, I don't often mean it to mean right. I mean it to mean the way that we're meant, the way that we're born. We're born sinful. We're born broken. So in that natural, born, broken system, I want to be the center. Little tiny babies. My little grandson, Jack, from the minute he wakes up to the time he goes to bed, believes that the world revolves around him. And we falsely give him that impression on him. Reminds me of, we have some friends that have two little girls, 8 and 10. And there was one night they were struggling with something at school. The one daughter was struggling with something at school, and she was giving her mother some pushback on a thing that was happening at school, and how a project was this, and how she shouldn't have to do this particular project, and really giving some grief. And the mother yells in from the living room back to the bedroom. Tessa, life is not fair, and you are not special. And the other daughter from the other room, Audrey, yells back in, "Way to be a parent, Mom." And the younger daughter was sort of getting on her, why would you say something like that? But that was good parenting. Life is not fair, and you are not special. What we mean, and what she meant in that localized context, was you're not the special one in the class, that you should get special treatment. But there is a sense where, unless we're learning this unnatural idea that life, and life is not fair, is coming up. I'm going to get to that. But you are not special, meaning you are not the center of the story. You are not the sun, but you are a moon. And we spent a lot of time. I don't know if any of you got to see pictures of blood moon this week. They were beautiful, and some of the pictures that they were showing, especially in the places where it was at apogee, the highest point. Where's Elliot? Am I right about that? Apogee. Yes. Perigee. It was beautiful. But the moon can only be beautiful when it finds its orbit around the sun. You and I can only be beautiful, can only find the glory that was intended for us when we revolve around the sun, S-O-N, when we revolve what the universe revolves around. And that's when life goes well. And then I can interpret life much better. Life makes better sense when I see it through that lens. Life makes better sense when I realize that I am a moon and he is the sun. And so when difficulty happens, when things don't seem to give me the glory, the credit, the sense of righteousness that I want, I can have a better sense of things in that regard. And those are chiefly the lessons that we need to be telling ourselves, and that the gospel wants to tell us. Life is not fair. You are not special. I'll start with you are not special. We are special to him. But we will never be him. And when we find our specialness in him, rather than trying to be him, life becomes nurturing, joyous, satisfying, beautiful, free, empowering. But the other thing we notice in this passage is that it says here that if you heard me talk about it from as soon as he got to Rome, he was held under arrest. He was put under house arrest. Now, house arrest was a special deal. He wasn't put in a prison, but he was put under house arrest, which meant today, if you're in house arrest, you get a little low jack on your ankle. Just easier. It doesn't require as much manpower. Back in the day, they did the low jack, so the low jack was a Roman guard. So they would go on shifts. And I couldn't figure out this week to get a definitive answer as to what the shifts are. I was thinking it was like a 3-man system where you would go 8 hours a day and they'd have a round-the-clock watch of Paul in this house. He'd be chained to this guy. But some were saying that it's up to they would change shifts every 4 hours. So every 4 hours, 6 guys on some shift, or probably a larger shift than that, would be chained to Paul. Part of me wonders in that situation, who was really trapped? Who in that situation? If you're Paul, and with the idea that I might be in chains physically, but the gospel is expanding boldly and unhindered, and I've got 6 to 10 guys that are chained to me on a regular basis and have to listen to what I am, who's really in charge in that situation? I'm not sure I could be chained to Paul. And I believe most of what he believed in all of it. But the thing that we see from that perspective, Luke ends the story by saying, number one, the story's not about you. The story's not about Paul, Peter, any of the bit players, any of the players that are special to the central figure, but they aren't the special central figure. And just before we leave that sense of not being that we're not special, we're special to him, but we're not the central figure. Is that was in the Garden of Eden? The problem that happened in the Garden of Eden was they went from being moons they wanted to go from being moons to being suns. Because the devil said, did God really say that the day you eat of it you will die? For when you eat of it you will be like him. You will be like him. So the temptation in the Garden of Eden was, why should I have a God or follow God or trust in a God or be special to a God when I could be? Why be part of a play that's not about me when I could have a play that is all about me? Problem is that you can't alter creation. So that's where the brokenness came up. You got big players trying to be the main player, and that can't work. And so God is restoring that process. And so here Luke is saying, find our place in the play that Jesus is writing. Find our place, find our story in his story. And life becomes beautiful and less encumbered in our brokenness and more redemptive in the process. But it's also, life is a struggle because Luke describes in detail how Paul, his life got, starting chapter 19, everything got bad. His life just took on this life of suffering, of difficulty, of strain, of struggle, of shipwreck. And then in the end here, it ends with that not being resolved. He's in prison. He's still in prison under house arrest for 2 years, and he's still there. And we don't really know how it ended. Well, you know how it ended historically. He was ultimately martyred in that capacity. So life is suffering, and life is a struggle. And part of the truth of the gospel is that we have to calibrate our systems to understand that life is a struggle. When when the message of the gospel, when the work of the church, the message of the church revolves around the chief image. What is the chief image that the church revolves around? The chief image that our church revolves around. Every Sunday, it revolves around that. When that's your chief image, when that's the chief symbol of the faith that we follow, this is an implement of crucifixion. This is an implement of death. How can then not the lives of those who follow this chief image not also then reflect that image in our lives? It is about dying to my old ways, dying to myself, to my self-centeredness, dying to my desire to have the glory, dying over and over again. And that death, that sense of death, that sense of dismantling myself from the center of the story, that's painful. And here's the thing, because you trusted him as an intention in your own heart, as an intention in your own mind, certainly it began with God, who put the seed of himself, the seed of that faith inside of you. It manifested itself through a choice you made. It's an intentional life of suffering. It's an intentional life that way. Do you see? But not an intentional life of suffering to no avail. The suffering that the scriptures describe is not a suffering that is empty or a suffering that is whimsical or a suffering for suffering's sake. It is a suffering for the sake of that brings life. It's the suffering of an athlete who makes intentional choices about a lifestyle that they will live in order to be better, to bring glory, to finish the race, to succeed, to advance his setting, to advance his body, his or her body in some respects. That it is the intentional, because athletes make choices, right? So when the athlete goes out to Chili's with the rest of us, an elite athlete that's going to go out to Chili's, they're not going to get the fried cheese, deep fried with sprinkles. The rest of us might do that. I mean, the popcorn shrimp and the coconut shrimp, great. They're wonderful if you like those sorts of things, but you're probably not going to make that choice. And in that moment of that choice, it feels very like suffering. It feels very difficult. Here's the other thing. 5:15 in the morning, the athlete gets up and goes to the gym, or goes for a run, or goes out to do training with the other athletes. What are you doing? Sleeping. Because you're still in that coconut shrimp coma from the night before. The intentional choice, the intentional life of suffering is what Luke's getting at. What the gospel's about is that you're deciding, rather than live the life of empty struggle, where I try to be the center, where my brokenness has no purpose, where my sense of process has no ultimate meaning. I decide by trusting in letting Christ be the center of my story, and now I make intentional choices in favor of him at the center of my life, which means intentionally doing or not doing certain things that reflect my captivation by him. It all flows from that sense of captivation. He's in love with me. That love that he gave me at the cross, that love that he offers me and those who follow him at the cross is so overwhelming, so captivating. It makes me want to just love him and serve him and let him get all the glory. And as a result of those that love relationship, I start making choices in life about things, all kinds of things. What I do, what I say, how I think, what I desire, how long I do, what I stop doing, as it relates to jobs, as it relates to sex, as it relates to people, as it relates to serving others, as it relates to activities in life. All of my life then becomes an intentional, and most of those choices are going to be straining because they're unnatural. They're unnatural. Just as going into a gym and trying to lift a bar loaded down with 135 pounds on your chest and pushing it away from yourself 10 or 20 times. That activity is unnatural. You know why? When is the last time you ever did that with 135 pounds regularly? Don't. But when you're training, you do. When you make an intentional choice to move down a path of health and athleticism or achievement or a sense of progress or a sense of, an intentional choice to suffer for growth. That's the gospel. The gospel is I trust in Christ. I make him the center. And as I make him the center of my life, as I offload, I'm no longer the center story. He is the center story. That intentional faith relationship then drives me to make choices that aren't always easy, but are powerfully transformative. Not just for me, but for others. It changes the paradigm under which we operate. Here's the paradigm. Prior to Christ being the center, my paradigm is life and resources are meant for my glory. All of life that you have, how can I use what you have to benefit me? How can I use what the world has to benefit me? How can I be better as a result of the resources that are out there that you have and that I want? That's the paradigm of life without Christ, because I'm the center of the story. When the paradigm shifts, when I'm no longer the center of the story, but Christ is the center of the story, now the paradigm shifts, and it is, what do I have to benefit you? What resources and opportunities do I have that I can give away to benefit you and benefit Christ? That paradigm shift is jarring to the system and feels painful. That's why, in that regard, it's suffering. The other thing that you notice about the other thing about life being a struggle is that Luke normalizes that in Paul's experience, and we are meant to understand such struggle as being normal. There's a movie that I'm fond of for a number of reasons. It's about Mel Gibson called We Were Soldiers, and it's a rough movie, so don't watch it if you're not it's a wartime movie about the U.S. entrance into the Vietnam War, and there's one scene where he's training his officers, and they're under mock fire, and they're crawling under things in the mud, and while they're doing all of these exercises, and the bombs are going off and the guns are going off, he's yelling to his officers who are then carrying, kind of leading their men. And he says, "This is wartime. What you have to teach your men is that this is normal in wartime. The cries of the wounded, the shouts of the enemy, the bombs and the explosions, the blood and the dirt, the vast sort of explosive change in direction. These are normal in battle." There's a sense where what Luke is trying to communicate, what the gospel is trying to communicate, is that the struggle is normal. Part of the struggle, part of what I find doing counseling, part of what I think I find even in the page of Scripture in some of the ways they describe the story and in the lives that you shared, is that the struggle itself isn't as difficult as the surprise that I feel while going through it. Death, loss, abandonment, hurt, betrayal, all part of struggle, all part of the hardness of life, all in a broken world, all very normal. But a lot of what I do in counseling is in the first series is helping people to realize nothing wrong, nothing unnatural is happening here. Don't be surprised. It's as if, my dad used to say, that if you touched a hot pan, that it was more of a surprise that was the problem than it was the heat of the don't grab it. If the pan's hot, don't grab it. Right? A lot of times struggle occurs, and in our surprise and in our sense that something wrong is happening, we grab it and we hold on to it. And it's like grabbing hold of an electrified fence. This hurts really bad. And part of counseling, part of what you do with friendships and in your families is just let go of them. Let go of them. Electrified fence. Don't hold it. It hurts when you do that. And what the gospel is trying to say is struggle's normal. Doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. It means the world's wrong. It means the world's broken. But in the sense of that, when you live in a broken world, broken things happen. That's not unusual. Let's move on to the next question, which is, how do I live in a broken world when natural broken things happen in a broken world? That's the next question, and that's the empowering question. That's the message of grace. That's the message of hope. And that gets me to the next place. Not an indication of who's winning. That's why this passage, I love how he juxtaposes. Paul was in prison, attached to a guy, 24 hours a day. But who's winning? Who's winning? The gospel's winning. Because it was being preached, and Paul was talking about two things. Talking about the kingdom, talking about Jesus. And the gospel's going out bold and unhindered. Paul was hindered because he can't leave home. But the gospel's unhindered. The gospel can't be stopped. The gospel always finds a way to move and to change and to bring grace and to bring hope and to bring transformation in your heart, as wicked, dark, and deformed as it is, and in need and desiring to have its own glory. The gospel still finds a way in you to change you, and the gospel will find, the grace of God will find an unhindered, bold way to win in our world, even though suffering, difficulty, loss, weakness, failure seem to be what's happening. Luke challenges us, the gospel challenges us to say, when you see life when you see the sufferings, when you see the struggles, when you see the darkness and the failure in you or in the world, you and I are tempted to think that the gospel is losing, that the grace of God is losing. And when we look at it, when we expand it to the whole world, we look at the entire world or our entire nation or our culture in some sense, and we go, who's winning? There's still suffering, there's still struggle, there's still failure, there's still, darkness and evil. Luke says, don't let the suffering, darkness, failure be the guiding force as to who's winning, because the gospel's winning. The central image of the church, the gospel is this: an implementation of death. But here's the thing. The reason this is also a symbol of winning, that the gospel is winning, is because it's an empty cross. Because when Jesus was put on it, it didn't do what it intended to do. It would seem as if this implement of death would destroy, would bring to an end, would be the end of the story. But it's empty. Because Jesus, in the face of that struggle, in the face of that defeat, in the face of that darkness, came back. Power of the resurrection, the hope of the resurrection says that suffering, loss, failure, darkness, evil is no match against the Savior and against the gospel of grace. It's bold and unhindered. The world seems counter. And in your life, it seems counter. And maybe even more poignantly, because everybody believes the gospel works for them. Do you believe the gospel is winning in your children, in your friendships, in your spouse, in your roommates? Thank you. Thank you that you prove to us in your scriptures, by testimony of your servants, that you are always, as it were, winning in our lives. Your gospel is always transforming, always finding a way to change, transform, and bring closer to you. Father, I pray that as we trust in that, Lord, we have a new view of our suffering, loss, have a new view of ourselves. That we weren't meant to be at the center of the story, that there's too much straining within ourselves. So teach us. Let that captivation we have of Christ and what He's done in our lives move us to new intentional decisions, keeping with that love.